I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it.
We did it.
And there we go.
Oh, what?
Hi.
What were you gonna say?
You said I'm about to record, and I said I'm going to keep it that way. So I wasn't actually going to hit record. I was just going to keep being ready to hit record.
Gotcha. Now I
but
get
I
what
did
you're
it.
saying. Yeah, you're a good guy. You play by the rules, so that's nice of you.
I now have meaning to my life. I hit
there you
record.
Go. Before I was so rudely interrupted, I was about to say, welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. My name's David. My friend is this guy.
I like Fresca, and my name is Aaron.
Are you drinking Fresca right now?
I am a sugar-free man.
That seems like a poor life choice. Actually, that's not entirely true. I don't mind Fresca.
I'm currently off of sugar, and I don't really love diet pop.
Yeah.
But something
100%.
about Fresca, like it still has that aspartame leftover taste.
Yes, it does.
It's not as, I don't find it as strong as normal diet pop. So
that's
it's
fair.
Kind of my one little treat that keeps me going.
Yeah, it is one of. I would agree. It's like the pop that uses aspartame or whatever that is tolerable. Because I'm the same way. I can't drink diet pops either. I think they're disgusting. So that's fine. That's fine. You do you, man. You do you. I actually forgot to bring even a water out to. I'm still in the RV. We were talking about that shortly before hitting record. I forgot to even bring water out here.
Just have some Doritos.
Do I have some Doritos, Bobby? Oh, I do. Look at that. Yeah, we're getting ready to drive home. We're stocking up on snacks, as it were. But which means I should have something to drink in here, right? But I think the only thing that's in here is I have cans of like cold brewed coffee, but I don't want to drink one of those right now.
You might just be ready to go home right after this. Then.
Oh, exactly. All right, kids, get in the RV. We're going home. I'm never sleeping again. Yeah. So anyway, I'm both looking forward to driving home and at the same time definitely not looking forward to it at all. Actually, by the time this comes out, we will be a few days into the drive. So if you're listening to this right now, think of me.
Welcome to David's personal hell.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thoughts, prayers, positive vibes, whatever you can send my way, much appreciated.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah. So anyway, let's get into some new music. There's a couple of albums that came out in the past few days. I always feel a little like, am I supposed to try to make it sound like we're recording this as new as possible? But at the same point, I'm like, well, obviously we're not, because we're about to talk about, I think for both of us, a couple of albums that just came out a few days ago. But by the time the podcast gets released, it'll a whole new round of new releases will have already come out. But so what do you got on the docket that you're listening to that's new or newer this week?
Yeah, I've got so for a newer one, Strike Anywhere's new EP, Nightmares of the West. So Strike Anywhere's a kind of a politically charged punk band that's been away for a while. I think I'm not sure if they broke up officially or not, but they definitely have been away, and so it's cool to get some new music from them. They're kind of one of the few kind of political punk bands that I really loved when they were in their prime, and so it's sweet to have some new tunes from them. Yeah. And I'm still jamming the Scott Sellers Influence album. I was listening to it again today on my bike ride home, and one that we failed to mention last week was the new single from Slick Shoes, which I guess if you listened to the interview, you heard about that, but that came out the Friday before last, and I'm still listening to that and still super excited about that.
So did you have a song off of the Strike Anywhere EP that kind of jumped out to you?
You know what? Not really. It's been how am I trying to say?
I couldn't tell you.
Kind of a maybe a bit of a difficult listen. It's one of those bands that, it's cool to have new music from, but it's, at least for me, it just doesn't hit me the same way as their older albums did. So
Right.
while it's really cool to have new music from them, I really enjoy it. There wasn't necessarily a specific song that stood out. It's an EP, so just go listen to the whole thing. It's 5 or 6 songs or
It's
whatever.
literally-
So
I was to say,
they're all good.
It's 7 songs and 20 minutes long. It's not much to,
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I did listen to it the other day, and I enjoyed it. Strike Anywhere is a band that I've, I feel like this gets said all the time, but it's a name that's always been out there for me that I was aware of, but never, as far as I can recall, listened to. So when you sent it, I'm pretty sure I heard about it because you sent it. I don't remember if it popped up on anything else for me, but I went and checked it out, and I dug it. It was good stuff. So I support that suggestion of Strike Anywhere.
Right on.
Yeah, I guess the new album kind of that I was listening to a few times since it came out would be Skeleton Coast by the Lawrence Arms. Yeah, they're another band that I think like I've known the name for years and never really, I may have listened to them here or there, but never really got into them. And I really dug this album for the most part. The song Dead Man's Coat is one that really kind of stood out to me. It's interesting because the vocals on I'd like to say I like half of this album because they have, I believe, 2 kind of lead vocalists, and one of them is really strange and kind of harder for me to get into, and the other one I don't know their names. Sorry, I didn't do the research, but the guy who sings on this song, Dead Man's Coat, it kind of reminds me, gives actually an Alkaline Trio and Bad Religion kind of mix.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I kind of dug it. If you're a Lawrence Arms fan, I don't need to tell you about them, obviously. So, you've probably already listened to it. But if you're like me and you haven't given them a chance ever, I mean, why not give them a chance? It's worth it. It's always worth giving new music a chance,
Yeah, I've seen them described as ogre punk. How do you feel about that description?
As what?
Ogre punk?
Ogre punk. I want to know what that even means. Like, my kids
guess-
actually just watched one of the Shrek movies today, so that's kind of fitting that you bring that up. But
I don't know if it's like if there's like they're bearded or they have a Celtic vibe or they're from the Northeast or something. I have no idea.
I don't know. Yeah. Because I want to say they're from Chicago area. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Ogre punk. The one guy whose voice I couldn't really get into definitely kind of has like at times almost like I don't want to say like a fairy tale quality. I don't know if that comes across right, but like he's got a weird interesting voice.
Maybe that's what it's from. Who knows?
Yeah, that could be like in some kind of movie or something. I don't know. That's funny. Ogre punk. Anyway, there you go. We're not here to talk about Strike Anywhere or the Lawrence Arms or the new Slick Shoes, any of that. We decided, if you saw the artwork for this episode, we decided to actually continue with a little bit more of an Alkaline Trio series. It wasn't meant to be a series. It was meant to be one episode that we kind of tied in to wrap up, I guess you could say, like the Blink-182 series that we did. But then when I was editing that episode, we had picked another band, other albums to do. And I was like, it's funny because I had said to you, I'm just not ready to leave Alkaline Trio yet.
Yeah.
And what I meant when I said that was I was just like wanting to listen to those 2 albums more and more. And then you were like, well, do you want to do another episode? And I was like, yeah, we could. And then, you'd mention like, how about 2 of their newer albums? Because you had mentioned in the last episode, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. We covered From Here to Infirmary as well as Good Morning. I mean, that wouldn't technically be the last episode because the last episode was the Slick Shoes interview. But you know what I mean? Last episode that we did together, we did From Here to Infirmary and Good Morning. And you had said in that episode that, yeah, you kind of got into them later in their catalog, so we decided why not do a couple later albums. So if you couldn't figure it out from the cleverly worded title that wasn't that clever at all, we're gonna cover Agony and Irony as well as This Addiction, but we're gonna start with Agony and Irony. So what's these were 2 albums that you kind of, I guess, put on the board. So why don't you take over introducing us to these records.
Yeah, and just to kind of tag on that last thought, I always appreciate when bands have, a big discography because, for someone like me that didn't get into them right away, or maybe, somebody didn't really like the earlier work or whatever, it's cool to have that opportunity where it's like, well, they've released, 4 or 5 other albums after that and still are releasing albums. There's a number of bands like that where it's like, it's pretty hard to get into those early albums, or I missed out on them. But it's great to have, other albums in the discography that, maybe sound better or have a change in style, or even a band like this that kind of stayed more or less the same, but it still has something more to give. So
yeah, we just real quick, we discussed kind of in that last episode when they jumped into From Here to Infirmary how some fans had said, oh, I miss the old kind of a little more raw, I guess you could say, less polished Alkaline Trio, whereas I think like these records, especially once we got into Good Morning, these records kind of carry over in that same vein. Like From Here to Infirmary was still a bit more raw than Good Morning, but I think that was, you could really see like the beginning of the polishing of their sound, which they've obviously carried over into later years. But yeah, so I would be interested to. I've gone back and listened to those first 2 records a couple times over the years, but those weren't the records that I originally got into either, so I don't really connect with them right away. But maybe they're records that I could go and listen to and be like, oh, actually, there's a lot of really good stuff here.
yeah, and I feel, so this is kind of a little off tangent, but a few bands that come to mind are, bands that we've talked about before, MXPX, and bands like Green Day, where you kind of have a certain crowd that maybe got into them at one time, but they've released lots before that, or some before that at least, and a bunch after. So it gives a lot of room to attract different kinds of listeners, which is always cool when a band can do that. Even if the style, like I said, with Alkaline Trio stays the same, it still gives that opportunity for more people to come and then discover the old stuff or new stuff, or you can pick and choose which era you like the best or whatever. So it's just always neat to have those bands.
It's interesting because Alkaline Trio, I find like they're a band that's been around for years that really polished that sound. Like you said, like the sound stayed fairly consistent. They've just gotten, you could say, like in a roundabout way, you could say they've gotten better at it, I suppose. Whereas then you mentioned bands like Green Day, where they've gone through stylistic, like style changes over time. And then like they've got legit different eras of that band in regards to sound. And then, you have bands like MXPX where, they've been around for a while as well. And it's safe to say, I think that, like their releases in, maybe it's not 100% safe to say, because they have had some pretty great albums in like out of the last few, but some of their stuff over the years has been kind of like, okay, like very much not enough to love or hate, I think. But just like, all right, well, that's there. I mean, if I want to come back to it, I suppose I could.
Yeah. And, and there's people that love those albums that maybe we don't love as much. And so again, more power to those bands that have more opportunity to gain more diverse listeners because they have so much material out there.
Maybe it's worth doing a series on.
Okay, let's get into this. Just kidding. So Agony and Irony is the 6th studio album by American punk rock band Alkaline Trio, released on July 1st, 2008. So happy Canada Day to us, I guess. That's already 12 years ago. So in my mind, when I brought this up, I was like, oh, some of their newer records. It seems newer, but it's still 12 years old. It's still a lot has happened in there, and so it's not like it's super new. But so with this album, the band had announced that they had signed with a major label. So this is kind of classic for that time. There was between the early 2000s, anyways, there was lots of kind of pop punk bands signed to major labels, and so that wasn't a new thing by any means. But like many of the major labels around this time, there was lots of restructuring happening, and bands would sign to a major label, and then all the staff would leave or switch, and it would kind of leave the band feeling a little bit abandoned. And so they ended up signing to Epic Records. So there was a restructuring process, and they took over on that. Regarding the album, vocalist and guitarist Matt Skiba stated that the band set out to set set out to record an anthemic hard rock record. I find that interesting, because I was listening to this, it's not necessarily the style that I would picture as anthemic hard rock. So it's
Right.
kind of, I wonder where they kind of, but as I'll say here, Matt was listening to a lot of Pat Benatar, Def Leppard, and a lot of the 80s MTV music that he grew up on. So I guess that's probably where he got that. There was a lot of influence from that on this album. And I don't really know a lot of that 80s music, so I didn't necessarily notice those influences as much. So it was fun to kind of listen and try to pick those out. I don't know if I was very successful at that or not, but an interesting way to kind of shift their sound and take on some different influences. So there's a theme of duality on this record. It's sort of a spin on, ebony and ivory, which of course represents black and white, which I always like that content. I think I remember saying that on the Far From Heroes interview, where I was talking about one of their albums, where there's just a lot of lyrical content about, good and evil and that battle that kind of goes on. And so, I think Alkaline Trio did a really good job of incorporating that into the lyrics and making that an interesting album. Mm-hmm. And by August, so that's, only a month later, the album had sold 57,000 copies, which, we mentioned on the last episode of theirs, talking about sales and how I was kind of unexpectedly surprised at kind of how many albums they were selling. I know that was still kind of the era of CDs. I think maybe they were starting to go out by then. I can't remember exactly the timeline, but I just thought that was still a pretty impressive number by that point.
Yeah. This album is it's an interesting one to me, going back to your comment about anthemic hard rock, because I don't, when I picture hard rock bands, I'm not picturing Alkaline Trio or this album even, right? Like, it's not like, how could Alkaline Trio do this? Anthemic for sure, but I feel like they were always pretty, like their choruses hit pretty hard, but maybe they did put a little, extra focus on that at times on this record, because I find with this album, comparing it to This Addiction, is that this album, I think, has more like high points, more memorable, like the memorable songs on this record are more memorable than on This Addiction. So I'm curious to see, like, when we get into that record, some of your thoughts on it, and also, if you've got some sort of background stuff on it. But and maybe that's part of the reason why, is because on this song, like, or on this album, maybe they were trying to really emphasize, like, making it so you can sing along and it's instantly like in your ear sort of thing.
Yeah, and when I think of this album, or as I listen through it, it's a great album. It's really catchy. There's lots of cool, memorable parts. Is it super anthemic? Is it, really dug in my ears? Not really. About the same as other Alkaline Trio albums, where it's, catchy parts, clever lyrics, simple structures, so it's easy to digest. But I don't know if I would necessarily say, it was like super anthemic. Yeah, it doesn't come to mind when I think of that.
Yeah, I just think maybe in the choruses, and just specifically like in the songs that I think kind of are those high points, I could just see like a little bit what they're getting at. The hard rock thing throws me for a loop, because at most it's an alternative album, right? Like, it's definitely not like a straight up punk album, in the sense that not every song is blasting you in the face with speed or anything like that, but it is definitely maybe it is. Who knows? Maybe when they sat down and wrote, they were writing harder hitting songs, and it's just their Alkaline Trio, so it just comes across as Alkaline Trio. I don't know.
Yeah, or even thinking, I can't remember what the album was right before this one.
Was that maybe Crimson?
Okay, it could have been. Yeah, I don't know that one as much. So maybe compared to that, this is a lot harder. Or maybe the influence was more kind of in overall maybe vibe of it versus the actual sound. I mean, there could be all sorts of different directions and ways to take that. So,
but I mean that, like it is. It's an. I'm sorry. I'm just looking to see. I think it would be Crimson, because Crimson was 2005, and then Agony and Irony was 2008. So Crimson was the record before, which I don't know if I've ever listened to that album, come to think of it, but
yeah.
Getting back to Agony and Irony, Calling All Skeletons as an opening track. What are your thoughts on that?
So this is the song that hooked me on this album. I remember listening to this at a listening station at HMV. For those that remember that, you could pick a CD and listen to it. And just as soon as that first song started, or the Skeletons, just with that guitar and the vocals, that just hooked me right in. It's so catchy to me. And
the hand claps.
Yeah, right. As I was listening, I was like, okay, that's fine. It's not my favorite, but I just love that, like, those big guitars, and so maybe that's kind of the reference, to that hard rock anthems, the kind of bigger guitar sounds on there.
Yeah.
And, the song seems to refer to an old relationship where the person had many skeletons in their closet, and how that can often leave the other person feeling like they have a hole in their chest. So it starts right off with the dark, depressing lyrics, but. But it's such a catchy song that I've never taken it as that. So I like that back and forth too of like really happy, upbeat music with, I wouldn't say necessarily darker lyrics, but whatever that category that fits into. So yeah, I just love this as an opening song.
But even a lot of times, if Alkaline Trio are writing happy songs, they're still dark.
Yeah, for sure.
Just the way they are. So let's get into, technically we just talked about Calling All Skeletons, but the first track we're going to look at, which is Help Me. So I think this, did I pick this one, or we both kind of agreed on this one?
Yeah, I had this one on my list, but I think
we both had it. Yeah. So why don't you take this one, though? We both did have this on our list, but I'll let you start on this one.
Yeah, this has a cool little piano part at the start of the song, which adds a lot to the song. So again, as I'm reading this, maybe those influences came in just softer than we're expecting. Maybe to them that was a big thing to add, and we're saying this is an anthemic hard rock, but there could be just those really small nuances, like just having there's just in the background of the song a little piano part. I don't know if that's inspired by like someone like Pat Benatar. I don't know a whole lot of their discography. So, but yeah, it's a great second track on the album. I often look on albums for that second track just to kind of see how it's going to follow up the opening one, and I really love this one. And so this one is a song about losing someone close to you, it seems. I really like the lyrics on this song, and again, it's a happy sounding song with kind of sadder lyrics.
Yeah, there's a few points on this record that I feel sold Mark and Travis of Blink-182 on the idea of recruiting Matt Skiba to join the band. This is one of those songs because it kind of feels a little bit like a newer Blink song with the piano riff in the start to me, like just the overall vibe. The only thing they changed for the new Blink songs, though, is instead of saying la 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 like Matt does in the bridge, they would say na 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 on a Blink-182 song. But
there you go.
I do immediately when that piano riff came in for me, like Skeletons, it came on, like the hand claps, everything's bright and happy. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. I like this. And then the second, because I think, this is the second song comes in and it's got this lead piano riff that I'm like, that is definitely new for them. It's not like a complex over the top piano riff by any means.
Right.
But I can get into it. And it's funny because like the take that I had from the lyrics is kind of how and I mean, maybe you and I can do this, just people in general, when it comes to like music, can oftentimes, sort of see themselves in whatever a songwriter is writing about. Like we've all seen it where, people get attached to a songwriter and they know every lyric and they're singing every line at the top of their lungs when they see them live because every line means something so deep to them, sort of thing, right? And this song, I kind of get that vibe at times, that's what he's singing about, how we can find a perfect connection in the midst of someone's heartbreak, but it's with someone we don't even know, and how the listener can feel like they know someone or that person knows them based on their songs, no matter how messed up either side may be in that sort of, whether you want to call it a relationship or whatever. And I also want to say the song has a pretty great music video with kind of like a steampunk vibe to it. And actually,
I forgot to watch it.
Yeah, Kat Von D is playing like the damsel in distress in it, which of course she's from LA Inc. back in the day, so it makes me want to go back and watch LA Inc. I don't know if you ever watched it. Knowing you've got a ton of tattoos, I'm sure you've seen it at some point in time. But
yeah, I remember seeing something about the video, and I meant to go back and watch it, and then I totally forgot. So
yeah, it's pretty cool. Let's get into the next song. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, Over and Out. So that's funny that you mentioned that last one reminding you of Blink, because that's the first thing I thought of with this song.
Yeah.
Maybe something off the Untitled or something. It's kind of got a darker, moodier vibe to start off. When it picks it up for the choruses. It was just something about it when it went on. I was like, I can picture this kind of Blink playing it. So it's that's funny. Kind of, they're pretty different bands, but I guess at times can be similar enough.
I mean, that's literally my first note. This is another song that reminds me of the newer Blink records. And I mean, like that, when you bring up Untitled, like Blink definitely on that album for sure kind of took a bit of a darker tone to some of their music. So I think they have that in common, the two bands, like Alkaline Trio and Blink 182. And obviously now they really have the thing in common where Matt Skiba's in both of them. But I've loved this song from the moment I heard it. Like, while, I liked the opening piano riff on Help Me, this song immediately just kind of with the overall vibe, I guess you could say, of the song, the moodiness of it, I was kind of like, okay. And Alkaline Trio has that ability for me sometimes to just kind of draw me in instantly of kind of going, what are they going to do next? It's just everything in the song works so well. Lyrically, I saw kind of some different sort of takes on it. Like, obviously, the song is about people dying kind of in different ways. And I'd seen some takes where it was, just that people die. But I feel like the whole song is actually about like war and how it can take your life, whether it's, you losing your life in war, whether it's, PTSD and you taking your life after war or like after going to war or whatever, or even, someone losing a loved one. Because like that was where one of the explanations I saw kind of different from what I saw, where it's talking about the last half of the second verse, where it talks about over and out she sang as the telephone rang. Yeah. And talking about like not having to, no more fear, not having to answer the phone anymore. Like I could see taking it as like, okay, like she's like shying away from, the people in her life who are trying to get a hold of her and reach out to her or whatever, because she's just come to that point. Or, it also being like being afraid every time the phone rings that you're going to find out that, if it's a husband or a loved one or whatever who's shipped overseas or something has in fact died, sort of deal, right? Like dreading that sort of contact, I guess you could say. But just the overall vibe of this song hooked me immediately, and it's one that when I think about this record, that immediately gets stuck in my head.
Yeah, I also had that. I thought the lyrics fit the music really well on this song, which I know maybe is kind of a vague thing, but yeah, just as I was listening, he would sing a part, and it's like, man, like the music just fits so well to this. So I thought that was cool how they pieced that together, and just kind of helps the whole song kind of fit together as a piece.
Yeah, and just like the just the repetitiveness of using the line over and out, and which is what makes me think like that it's more just about war than just plain old dying sort of thing, just because like over and out, a radio call sort of thing. But
yeah,
let's get into I guess the last song off this record, which would be Lost and Rendered.
Yeah, so this is the one that I noticed the 80s influence on as I listened kind of through it again after reading that. It's kind of got big opening guitars and drums that are maybe like a little bit reverby. The guitars sound a little bit lasery, maybe like some of those bands. And so that was the one where I was like, okay, I could hear one influence. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But for me anyways, that's what it reminded me of. This one stands out to me in this album. It definitely has a different feel for Alkaline Trio. It's really moody, but still super catchy and easy to digest. I know that could be said about a lot of their songs, but for some reason, this one just kind of stands out to me. And it's towards the end of the album, too, which, oftentimes, the bigger kind of songs or whatever can be towards the top of the album. So I always like that surprise of, getting towards the end, you're kind of winding down, and then a song kind of grabs you. The chorus sings, "Can anybody hear me? Is anyone out there? I've fallen and I'm broken down. I'm dying over here. If anybody's listening, I hope you hear my cries. My will to live is wearing thin. I'm running out of time." And I just thought, that could be used in many different circumstances in life, and, an easy way to relate to, whether that's, physically or mentally or spiritually or whatever, just kind of feeling that kind of at the end of your rope and wondering if, anybody can kind of relate to where you're at.
I really like a couple things on this song. First, going back to the comment on the guitars, it's definitely a different distortion that's being used on this song from the other songs. And, you know, sometimes I wonder with a band like this, how something like that comes to be, like in the sense that, you know, it's not like they're going into every song being like, okay, what pedal can I use on my effects board now, right? And like bringing all those things together. It's more, you know, Alkaline Trio is very much distorted guitar, clean guitar, maybe something like a chorus or a reverb or a delay sort of on there, but not really messing with tones too much as far as like from one sound to the next. And then this song comes out of nowhere and these guitars are quite fuzzy. It's almost like a sharp fuzz, like a harsher distortion, almost like not heavier by any means, but it cuts through more in my mind. And then I really liked the addition of when he says the line, at least for sure in the first chorus, when he says the line running out of time, how it like cuts to the clock ticking or whatever.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of a neat little touch. Sometimes those things can be a little gimmicky or whatever, but it works super well in this song.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you have any other notes or honorable mentions on this record?
Nope. That was it. But yeah, overall a great record. I mean, it's classic, typical Alkaline Trio, but you know, with maybe a bit of a twist, a few different sounds from the other albums that we talked about, and so it's kind of cool seeing that progression. Even though I think there's a few albums in between that we were not as familiar with, but it's nice going. You know, those other ones were pretty old. You know, early 2000s, or maybe it's even like mid 90s for those ones, and so. You know, it's cool to see just what they've done with the time and the writing and the progression on that.
Yeah, the last two we did were definitely early 2000s. I want to say they were 01 and 03. Or From Here to Infirmary was 98. Good Morning was 2003. No, From Here to Infirmary is not 98. That's a misprint for sure, because it also says that that Maybe I'll Catch Fire is 2000, which Maybe I'll Catch Fire came out before From Here to Infirmary. So Apple Music, get your stuff together. I'm going to guess 2001. In 2003. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on then to this Addiction.
So this is their follow-up. So their 7th album was released in February, and this was on their newly formed record label Heart and Skull, which was a joint venture with Epitaph Records. So this was also something that was becoming more common in this time, where bands would kind of create their own imprint, on a bigger label, but so that they could maybe be a bit more in control of their songs, and things hadn't really gone how they wanted to on Epic. Like I said before, things had shifted over, staff had changed, and they kind of found themselves not really knowing anyone at their record label, which would be a really weird feeling. And so thankfully they were just able to ask to be released from that, and they were, and then created this partnership with Epitaph. So they described this as a return to their punk rock roots. So I find it hard with some of these, like I said, with the last one with the anthemic, the hard rock. Like, to me, this just sounds like another Alkaline Trio album, which isn't a bad thing. I didn't listen to it and be like, oh, okay, back to the punk rock roots. Like, it was, it still kind of has its moments. But anyways, so they recorded this back in their hometown of Chicago with Matt Allison. So that's the same location and producer for much of their early material. So that was kind of interesting that they went back to that. The album draws lyrical inspiration from the band members' personal lives, addressing themes such as love, addiction, death, divorce, grief, suicide, politics, and war. And it became their highest charting album of their career. So, we've mentioned a few times with their numbers, and so it's just, again, really cool to see that they kept doing so well. What else did I have for this one? Yeah, so of the 11 tracks, 8 were written by Skiba and 3 by Adriano. And so now that I realize that Adriano was, more of a songwriter, I didn't realize that when we were talking about those other albums. So it was cool to listen and then be like, okay, now I can tell the difference of them too. And because, I can't remember what song it was off that last episode where it just threw me off. I was like, Matt just sounds so different, but that would be because it wasn't him. So... it was cool on this one. They both came up with an equal number of songs during the writing process, but they say that it was pretty easy to pick out the ones they wanted to use. There are 3 of them that they have equal say in the creative process. And I always wondered that with bands, that are both writers. We've talked about this with Blink and and a few others. Is there ever that tension of, like, well, this is a song I wrote, I feel really attached to it. Like, how does that dynamic work of, coming to the table with each having, a bunch of songs, and how do they, kind of pick? But it also goes to show that, when it comes down to it, it's the album and the band that is going to make the impact. And so, it's cool that they can, put their personal emotions aside and pick the songs that are going to represent them the best.
It's interesting that you brought up the bit about, did you say it was Skiba that said, this was them going back to their punk rock roots, or was it Dan?
Yeah.
So one thing I definitely noticed between this record and Agony and Irony is that this record, I can see that. To me, it feels more raw. The production, when you then also mentioned that they went back to kind of like the original guy they worked with back in the early, I was like, oh yeah, like this record sounds different to me. It sounds more like their old stuff. And I maybe the easiest way to, I guess, sort of describe that is that the production to me sounds more raw and a little bit thinner than, we'd heard on Good Morning or on Agony and Irony. Like, it reminded me a little bit more of, what we'd heard on From Here to Infirmary sort of stuff. So I can kind of see that. Now, it's a return to their punk rock roots, but also they're more polished than they would have been earlier on, right? Like, we talked about that as far as, songwriters are concerned. But I put this one, the first time I put this one on, I listened straight through without even realizing that, I'd reached the end of the record. I was like, oh man, that was good. Now, it was harder for me to pick songs off this one because I didn't find there were as many that like just stood right out as there were on Agony and Irony. But I do think kind of that it's the better overall record for me anyway. And I did want to say a couple things. One, the opening track, which is also the title track, has a bit of an Ataris vibe to me on the opening riff. Like, as soon as it came in, I was like, what does this remind me of?
Oh, yeah.
And it's totally the Ataris that it reminds me of. And then the music video is pretty great because it's got, I don't know if you saw this one, but it's the band's playing in like this wide open valley, and there's like a bunch of like school age kids or whatever that are lined up on opposite sides of the band, looking like they're about to play the most epic game of like Red Rover or whatever. They're standing in a line, they start running at each other, and then as they get to each other, though, they run into each other and they explode into colorful feathers. So I don't know what's really going on in that video, but it's pretty great watch. And here's a little interesting tidbit that I noticed. I was thinking about this. Up until their latest full length album, Is This Thing Cursed, every single one of their albums starts with Matt Skiba singing. Like, they have,
oh, wow.
they have
never
two.
picked up on that.
Yeah, they have two distinct lead singers in every record outside of Is This Thing Cursed, including the split with Hot Water Music for sure. And getting into like their EPs and other splits, I'm not 100% sure, but they're all Matt Skiba songs. And then Is This Thing Cursed starts with a Dan song, and I'm like, oh, that's crazy. But
yeah,
anyway,
I wonder if there was any specific thought behind that, or if it's just kind of their thing.
Who knows? I mean, maybe like you had mentioned on this record that I think you said 8 songs were written by Matt and then 3 were written like by Dan. Like,
yeah.
I mean, obviously if that's usually the case, like with what makes the record, obviously you're probably going to have a better chance. I don't think that, I'm curious now to flip through the songs. Like, is Dan singing lead only on the songs he wrote, or does he sing lead on some songs that Matt wrote? Because I felt like it was more evenly spread out than that, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and check, but yeah,
especially, I was going to say real quick, especially since if that's the case, 2 out of the 3 songs we picked for this album are Dan's songs. So if he's only singing the songs he wrote, we almost picked every one of his songs. So why don't we get into the first one, which is Dine, Dine, My Darling.
Yeah, so that's I love Dan on this one. Yeah, I just love the flow and the feel to the song. There's something about it that catches my ear, and it just kind of makes me happy as I listen to it. It's really catchy. It's got a smooth chorus. Like we said, it's one of Dan's songs. It has this, kind of the classic key change halfway through the song that I usually like, because it kind of lets you hear the song, almost in a different version. And it gives more opportunity to kind of stretch the vocals and add some dynamic to the song. And it's not something they do very often. And so when they did it on this, I definitely noticed that. Again, it's a darker song lyrically, kind of reminds me of Romeo and Juliet, kind of the whole let's have one awesome last day together and then die in each other's arms vibe. And so I just kind of got a kick out of that and took me back to watching those old school Romeo and Juliet movies. And it's such a great song. I love this one.
That's a good pickup on the Romeo and Juliet thing because, I mean, notes-wise, I said on this song, it seems to be, it's clearly a song about someone who wants to spend his every last waking second with this other person because kind of basically you never know when what second's going to be your last type thing. But it's a bit, this is an interesting song to me because talking about the key change real quick. I don't typically like key changes in songs. I find like sometimes they're good, but a lot of times I'm kind of like, and I mean, they obviously serve a purpose to like kind of take a song to the next level. But what I think really takes this song to the next level on this particular instance is actually like Derek's drumming, because when the key change happens, he also changes up what he's playing. And specifically on the line where he says, and then kiss, kiss, kiss until the last clock tick, he's doing these snare rolls that kind of like totally change the feel of that line. And so the first time I heard it, it like just jumped out to me. But there's also a bit of a throwback, a bit of a reference, I guess you could say, on this song to Private Eye, which is the opening track off of From Here to Infirmary, when Dan sings, I'll be bored as heaven. I don't know if they got that line from somewhere else. I mean, obviously it's a play on, like bored as hell sort of thing, right? But he's saying, I'll be bored as heaven, which potentially I think he could be referencing the line New Year's Eve was as boring as heaven from the song Private Eye.
Oh,
but that could be wrong though, because Matt sang Private Eye and Dan sings this one. But if in fact, Dan is singing some songs that Matt wrote, he very well could be referencing that song. But I mean, it's also an Alkaline Trio song, so he can reference it if he wants, There
you go.
There are no rules.
This is on their label. They're breaking all the rules.
That's right. They can do whatever they feel. So let's move into the next song, which is the song Off the Map. So this was my pick for this album, and it was immediate with this album from the moment I heard it to, trying to figure out what songs I wanted to cover. Off the Map, from the harmonics kind of starting at the beginning as Matt is sliding down his guitar and just muting the strings, straight into Dan singing and Matt just like playing. I think might just be palm muting, and it's just the voice and the guitar.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of like slowly comes into the song, right? Like it's kind of like a casual pre-chorus, and then the chorus is kind of quiet. And then it's just like from the moment it starts, it's just like dragging you along, going like, okay, what's going to be coming up next with this? And Matt's harmonies on the chorus are great as well. When he say, come on, they use the lyric, row, row, row my boat, right? Come on. Like that's, and I mean, Matt's harmonies make it great. It just fits the whole song. Lyrically, I think it's something we've all faced before, specifically if you're in a relationship with someone, making up after a fight. The nautical imagery used reminds me of the saying, smooth seas never made a skilled sailor. So if your, relationship hasn't experienced any kind of tension or whatever, the smallest ripple is going to send you off course. And, and I also really like how lyrically, especially in that first verse, he's just talking about like, okay, we fought for over 2 hours. I'm surprised we made it out. I think he says, I needed more wine, you needed more sleep, or something like that. And then he talks about going and sitting in his old chair, or sitting in his chair and playing his new guitar. It's just like these like really regular sort of lyrics that he's saying. Like, yeah, I mean, you just had a fight with someone you love. What do you want to do? I just want to go sit in my chair and play guitar, man. I just got to blow off some steam, right? Like, it's kind of cool. And then the line, I'm so far off the map, the sun is shining while it's raining, and I'm draped in silver lining, is pure poetry. It's so dang good. Like, I don't know. This song, I would say thank you for recommending this album purely based off of this song alone.
Well, that's funny because those are pretty much all the exact same things that stood out to me. I really I love the pre-chorus, and I love how the chorus I had to go and look at the lyrics because like, is this the chorus? Because
Yeah.
the first time through, it just kind of keeps it going.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really clever way to just change it up a bit. Until later in the song, it's a little bit more upbeat. But yeah, that harmonizing with the roll your boat back to shore, like this just so.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, I'm burping. So catchy, and I wish they harmonized more together because it just their voices aren't too drastically different, but different enough that I'm assuming that's Matt doing the harmonies.
Yep.
It just adds that extra touch of just like, oh, this just grabbed me into the part. It was already great, but now it's memorable, and I just look at the words and I can hear it in my head, and so I wonder why they don't do that more, but maybe that's just kind of their writing style.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it makes it impactful when they do it, right? Like when that happens, you typically notice, I think. But yeah, great song. Let's get into the last one, which is Piss and Vinegar.
My two favorite drinks.
Gosh!
Besides Fresca. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Sorry. The opening of this song reminds me so much of like classic 90s alternative pop punk. The two bands that came to mind immediately were Eve 6 and Lit.
Okay.
Like, just something with the vocals and the guitar. Go back and listen to it and see if you can hear those bands in there. I can picture it on like kind of any kind of 90s movie where a guy gets dumped or something, and
Right.
he's like walking around or something, and this song is on. I love that little guitar lead in the song.
Yeah.
It adds so much. There's not a ton of that on this album. They did strip this album down, like you said. It's a bit thinner. They didn't do a ton of overdubs and extra parts. So this part stood out to me a lot. I can't remember exactly what it was, but just a little kind of ditty that just added a lot. Yeah. I don't have a whole lot else to say about this one. I mean, it's just over 2 minutes, so it comes and goes fast.
Yeah.
But again, I like, in that 2 minutes, there's some really cool parts in there that make me want to listen to it again. So that's almost better to have a shorter song that makes you want to go listen to it again than just, repeating parts or whatever. And yeah, great Alkaline Trio song. It's got a great chorus and a bridge too. And yeah, I love this.
It's always good to leave them wanting more. And I think this song definitely does that. There are a few things that I wanted to say about this song. That guitar riff that I think you're talking about definitely reminds me of like early 2000s, late 90s pop punk or whatever. But the phrase "full of piss and vinegar" has always been a phrase that makes me laugh. And I was like, where did this come from? And I mean, it just turns out that there were actually originally two variations of this phrase, like one of which was pep and vinegar, but I don't know if that holds the same effect as piss and vinegar. Like pep and vinegar makes me think like, yeah, someone who's just like full of energy and, is ready to put that energy to use. Whereas like piss and vinegar reminds me of someone who's full of energy, ready to put that energy to use, but also has attitude with it, right? Like it's just like, I don't care what you say. I don't care what you're going to try and do to stop me from doing this or that or whatever. So it's just funny. I was like, could you imagine if the song though was called Pep and Vinegar?
Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same edge to it for the song, so
no,
I'm glad they went with piss.
It really doesn't. And I feel like that's the phrase that stuck around more so than pep and vinegar. But anyways, I guess like did you have a conclusion you wanted to say? I did have a few kind of overall concluding notes about these records, but what were your thoughts on the two
albums?
albums?
It was just the final opinions on this album were a bit mixed. Some called it an easy listen with the same soothing vocals and clean-cut sing-along choruses we've grown to love. Overall, a great offering, but not overly addictive. And there was some other comments about, it could be a bit polarizing to fans. Some who love the album because it goes back to the roots, some who dislike it because it's too, a cheap imitation of older days, and then those who thought it was a step backwards. So, when I think of all those, when I've listened to all these records, to me, it all sounds like Alkaline Trio. Maybe I just haven't listened to them to enough to say, this era was better than the other. And so it's just interesting that this album would have been one that kind of split fans because there's a lot of great songs on it. It still sounds like them. It's not, disorienting people or something. So I thought that was an interesting comment.
Yeah, that is interesting. I actually really liked both of these records. I think in the end, the one I liked more was This Addiction. Agony and Irony, really good. Like I said, I think it had some of the better songs, but overall, I liked the flow of This Addiction more. The one thing, my biggest complaint about these two records, and I don't know if these were on the original releases or not, but the acoustic songs at the end I don't need them. Like, I don't know why they're there. Specifically, I have no idea why they have an acoustic version of Maybe I'll Catch Fire on there, because that's literally off their second album. Like, why it's not an acoustic version of a song on this record. They just threw it on there. Now, having said all that, I enjoy these acoustic versions of the songs, but I don't need them. Obviously, they released an acoustic record, I think, a few years after that or whatever. And it's like, that's the perfect place for them. But to just throw on 4 or 5 or whatever it was, like acoustic versions of songs at the ends of these, I was like, it just makes it feel like the record doesn't end, especially when it should have ended, right? Like, it had its natural end, and then they're like, instead of it being like, oh, here's a bonus track, an acoustic version, it's literally, here's an EP's worth of acoustic songs on the tail end of these full lengths.
Yeah, and was that because they were like deluxe releases, or that's on because I thought on Spotify it said something about I can't remember
sorry,
what it was.
Yeah, they are. I'm looking now. They are the deluxe versions, but those are the only ones that are on Apple Music, which drives me crazy. Like, there's a good chance that whenever I was playing them, I was typically driving, and I was like, oh, I should have just like removed those songs, because, you know, I'll set something up where I'll be like, play this album, and then you go play later, or whatever, and I'll just kind of pick a few albums in a row. If I'm driving far enough. And so when it would be getting to those, I'd be like, oh, I should have just deleted those. Like, I'm not a fan. I don't know about you, but I'm not really a fan of deluxe versions when the idea is just tack a couple of extra songs on there that are acoustic versions or B-sides or whatever. It never sits right with me.
Yeah, it always seems a bit lame, and I honestly just didn't even listen to them because I saw it there and I was like, you know what? This wasn't a part of the original album as far as I know. They're not songs I listened to when I bought the CD, and I was like, I just want to leave it as is and not, taint my view of that. So I'm glad I didn't.
Right.
Too bad for you.
Speaking of leaving it as is, I think that's going to wrap it up for this episode. So before we get out of here, though, all the stuff we always got to do. Go ahead, follow us on our social media sites, Instagram, Twitter, @GrowingPunkPod. You can find us on Facebook as well. You can also find us wherever you're listening to podcasts, your favorite podcast apps. We are there. So go rate, review, subscribe, that stuff. Tell your friends. You know how it goes. Also on our Instagram and Twitter and stuff, you'll find our personal Instagrams and Twitters there as well. So go follow us there too. But that'll do it. So bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Greatly appreciate it. See you next time.
Buy your thumb, sir? I do buy my thumb, sir! Do you buy your thumb, sir?